Hello. Today I'm going to talk about multimodality use in healthcare, and we'll step away from the NOAA white paper and that exploration for a minute. And I'd like to talk to you about my personal experience. Um, this is a picture of me standing in front of probably my most well-known painting in South Dakota called Cowgirls in New Boots. And it sort of sets the stage in that most of my work is about my personal experiences or autobiographic, as well as our region. This is a work called Perennial Yawn, and it's telling a story about my son's first efforts, or me watching him learn how to write his name. And I appropriated or borrowed a figure from a 15th century, I'm sorry, I forgot his name, a painter, with this winged figure and her horn trumpeting in this great event. And it's a play on the ordinariness of all of our lives, and yet the details are very significant to us personally. And this is a baseline. I continue to make art for myself and others and show it professionally. But some of these ideas have translated very well into healthcare environments. Uh, Forgive me if I'm repeating myself, but here are some basics about my background. Having been born in Cheyenne, Wyoming, with a Bachelor of Fine Arts from the University of Washington in Seattle, and worked for an art supply company there and started a career as a freelance or a gig, uh, self-employed entrepreneur, if you will. So that leads to a lot of different types of jobs and learning about the business side of creating your own work and having many clients and bosses, so to speak. Things shifted when I went back to school as a non-trad student to earn my MFA, and a lot of that was informed by having a son and looking for more professional, stable opportunities. And um, an MFA certainly provides credibility as a fine artist, but more importantly for me, it allowed me to expand the places that I taught. So as an educator, um, I've worked, I currently work for the University of South Dakota, but have also worked in this region as an associate professor of painting at Claflin University. And then I believe I've already told you how I got into healthcare, but I do that work as an artist with the South Dakota Arts Council, and been on that roster for over 10 years, as well as working for Sanford Health, specifically Sanford Vermilion Medical Center. And when I throw up this slide of an excerpt of my resume, it's a little bit tongue in cheek, which just goes to show you that if you keep after something, and just keep moving, you acquire a lot of experiences. And if you were to look at specific awards or shows, there's nothing too, um, you know, um, grand in any of these, but we all have the option to develop our own career. And for me, one of the priorities was to stay in paint, as I say, and to just keep creating. I'll go through this part a little bit more briefly. This is a more current work. I did a whole series on raw canvas, and essentially it was about my experience having traveled overseas with my family and lived in Turkey for 8 years between the ages of 7 and 16. Um, and then having returned for the first time to have an art exhibition, and with my son, who was 16 at the time, which was similar to the age that I lived there. After all those decades, it was a very impactful exhibition, and here's some photos of some of the process. We collaborated with a lot of new friends, and I had the good fortune to even see some older friends from long ago. And that's one of the passports of creativity, is it's a universal language, and you can speak and connect with a lot of different types of people. This is a more current work, which I would consider mixed media, because although there's a little paint, there's some rhinestones and feathers and a fabric too. And that was the intention of this lecture, is to share a little bit more about my process, but also maybe as an inspiration for this upcoming project where I've asked you to create works and to talk about them as well. You know by now that there's a number of practitioners for the arts in healthcare, and the spectrum on the very on one side is like family and friends and volunteers, all the way across through the artists and to the creative art therapists who have, as you're learning, creative art therapists have a degree usually in psychology or mental health counseling, and with their art experience and understanding of materials, they match that with outcomes and measurable outcomes that serve their clients. Whereas artists in healthcare are promoting relaxation, positive distraction, and personal expression, and use of materials. And this distinction is extremely important. I've said it again and again, and I do at most places that I talk, because it's still kind of an oversight for people to round up and say, oh, you're doing therapy. And we really want to make sure that we don't step on the therapist's roles, because the process for licensure and registration and their being is significant, whereas we, doing arts and health, also have our place in client wellness. And the other thing that this slide demonstrates is that although I'm a visual artist, we're still talking about music, theater, dance, literature, contemplative arts, as well as the visual arts. And there I am as a visual artist, but noticed all the different practitioners along that chart. And the musicians, of course, the most accessible to come in and play at the bedside, or create performances somewhere within the facility. So that's why we see usually an abundance of musicians. So here's an example of one of the early larger scale projects I did at the Cancer Center in Sioux Falls. It's called Our Blossoms Mural, and it's a 3-part or a triptych painting. And it was inspired by my mother's love of gardens, and she had also passed from the same disease of cancer. So I created the backdrop, and in this learned a lot about the process of engaging the public. Um, and you can apply this to your projects too at some point. You've got to think about there'll be people that are very comfortable with art supplies and those that are quite intimidated. So I created cardboard cutouts and chalk, thinking that people could come and um, trace around a flower shape and then paint it in, and then also offer a full range of paints and brushes for people that were willing to just step right up to the canvas. And in fact, those cutouts gave people confidence to be more creative and inventive. Within a couple of weeks, we had 300 people that have come to these canvases and make their mark. And another exceptional surprise was that when I asked people to sign the back of the canvas rather than the front, I rarely like to interrupt an image with a signature, even on my own pieces. Um, Folks had Sharpies to sign their name, and they also made dedications. And I find that's true of a lot of projects. When you include people in the process of creating, you're going to allow for those those modifications that they bring to it. And in fact, the dedications on the back made it even more significant. And they still hang up in Sioux Falls to this day. Here's another project that I'm happy to describe to you at some point, but essentially it's foam core board that framers and photographers use with adhesive on one side, and this black and white printed covering protects that adhesive. And what I did was cut out shapes in this mandala pattern so they were symmetrical or same on the both side. And when you cut through that black and white paper and pull that away, the little sticky part shows, and you can sprinkle colored sand in there. And that was a successful project for the for Sanford. But I would say too that my interns and students since then have taken the same process, the adhesive backboard and the colored sand, and just taken it 110% in better or different directions. And so we have barn quilts done. We've had representational landscapes and outdoor scenes in these sand paintings. And that's another key to these processed or participatory based projects, is that there's going to be um, room to change and modify based on someone's imagination and creativity. And the reason why I show this next slide for another large scale painting project is, one, I love the diversity in photographing folks working on it. I've photographed them from behind as a HIPAA consideration to protect their identity, even though they're in a public space. And two, this winter landscape refers to the fact that a lot of my residencies I like to take in the wintertime because the weather is so brutal that sometimes art making can really add even more wellness and respite from the cold weather. Who's Your Rock? This was a specific event that we were asked to come and host an art session there. So this was made around the idea of, one, the pink for the symbolic color of the cancer retreat, and two, who's your rock? Like, who is your main level of, who's your main supporter? And so people decorated these individual rock shapes, these pebble shapes, and we made a pebble bed that was able to be displayed. And again, I hope these projects seem super accessible and that you might be thinking of modifications or even jumping on Pinterest on your own to get some ideas that you can modify for your own expression and purpose. Let's Go Fly a Kite and fabric painting. Fabric is a really soft, warm, accessible material that I find people really enjoy working with. Some of the other materials can get a little cold or well, people have very different responses to the materials. It's a very, very interesting investigation over the years. And the other reason why I showed this slide is that sometimes projects can come from the patients themselves, and that's certainly true with Let's Go Fly a Kite, where again we asked people to contribute um, different kites in this painting, but it came from an individual who was a professional or semi-professional, what do they call it? Pilot, I guess. There's nothing to talk about there. That previous picture was from the early days at Sanford Arts Vermilion, the program that I've coordinated. This is our 7th year. And the humble beginnings of nothing on the wall and visualizing what we would hope to make. This is an example of a felt board, much like the old-fashioned Sunday school boards that would tell stories from a Bible study. This large bulletin board was in a hallway that staff used, and so I created, with my interns, we created seasonal backdrops and then all these little felt pieces, because felt to felt will stick naturally. And so that was kind of a fun thing to for staff to interact with and move things around from time to time. And so the display would actually change from week to week. Here's an opening that we had with our interns, which was really well attended, and that's always exciting. Here are some of when it comes to interns, volunteers, and professional development for artists coming into the program, here's some of the broad characteristics or reasons why people do this work or attracted to this work. Certainly it can be for an artist who normally works in their studio or with a small group to come into a community setting and be of service. Some people are honoring a loved one, and that's what compels them to give back. They're certainly the most appreciative audiences that you will find in healthcare. People are at a very open and vulnerable state, and we have to honor and respect that. But certainly, people are very appreciative of the work we do, which makes it very fun to keep coming back. And then there's a list of personal characteristics. I hope you can see yourself in this list. I would say an openness, strong observation skills. Sometimes introverts do much better at this than extroverts, but I've seen both. A sense of humor, a sensitivity to cultural values is so important these days that the third class that we have designed on ethics, populations, and multiculturalism has as a component that addresses cultural sensitivity, just in the name of being inclusive and doing our best to show respect and making the work that we do and the projects accessible to anyone who's interested. Consistent enthusiasm, and things, no matter how much you plan, are always going to change. So this ability to improvise or to change, see something different in the moment is something that you can learn, and it's a good heads up. It's something good to recognize ahead of time. We've had music, we've had dance, we've had all kinds of artistic media and modalities used within our program, and a lot of it depends on the people that come to join me. As you can probably tell, I'm very comfortable with the visual arts, but when it came to music, it was our musicians and songbirds that helped create sing-alongs and drum circles, as well as performances. I mention presentations because it is a factor of this work, and it is important to the field that those of us that continue it are willing to advocate and to communicate about what we're doing. You can have a great session and there it sits, but the people that have hired us, stakeholders in the organization, they appreciate being continually updated and educated about our approach, our goals, our materials, etc. And that's why I included this presentation slide. And here we see staff co-presenting as well as administration all over the country. That's fun to say. So here we're back to multimodality or mixed media approaches to art projects. And excuse me. And I emphasize collaborative as well as individual projects. Collaborative meaning many times people are much less intimidated if you say, would you like to help, and do a little bit on something much larger scale. So it's really a group that creates something or participates in an event. And then there are some that are either creatively bold or just willing, who want to do individual projects to take home with them or to give away. And so it's really important that we be thinking on both levels as we start developing our programs. So this is minimal, but this is what we've expanded to, because nobody wanted. I found out that people don't want to paint every day like I might want to. So the visual arts now includes, with the two-dimensional visual arts, it's drawing, painting, sand work, cut paper, collage, to name a few. And you're welcome to look up any of these terms if they seem technical, but they're pretty straightforward and using materials that are easy to find. And in the 3D, we have objects that we create out of crepe paper, clay, mosaic, which is glass tiles, origami, which is the paper folding, bookmaking, and as I mentioned before, the fiber arts or material is a really great resource. Music, we have listening environments where somebody would act as the audience and other as a performer. Sing-alongs, performances, playing instruments. Another way we could think about listening environments is we've implemented music and memory program, which is the individual iPod playlists so that people can listen to their own favorite songs for periods of time using the earphones and the iPod. With writing, we have poetry recitation or reading out loud, expressive reading, writing and literary exercises. And my hint is that often when it comes to composing writing, at least with the geriatric community I work with, or even I've found at the Children's Hospital or traditional hospitals, that creating them as interview questions takes some of the pressure off of writing a story or writing a poem, and it's a good way to interact and connect. Contemplative, we have prayer, guided meditation, breathing, exercises, and visualization. And movement, there is wheelchair yoga or woga, stretching, dance that we've worked with at our facility. So I'm finishing up with just a couple more things. When it comes to your projects and multimodalities, we'll learn more as the courses progress about the needs of a specific illness in a person or an age group. That's what we mean by a population? Is it a veteran? Is it an adolescent in a detention home? Is it an infant in a hospital? There are a lot of variables that go along with a population. But I would say that um, a wide variety of materials and modalities, the way we share, are available to us. Additionally, as you can well imagine, the next course in materials use and safety digs a little bit deeper into the materials to see what is most applicable, what is safe, and what are the things that we avoid and why. But I would say at this point, when sky's the limit and we're just learning about the field, and you're going to be creating pieces that either answer prompts or from your own imagination, it really comes down to your talents and your curiosity. So we've had people that have sewn. Certainly, there's singing, uh, juggling, ceramics, poetry reading, drawing, etc. I feel like anyone who comes who wants to serve in our facility, we can find a way to match what they have to offer with the people that we serve. I remember a couple football players that came in for service learning hours and did a great job with chair yoga once a week for our partners, our clients. Okay, couple more slides. So here is, for those of you that are a little bit deeper in their fine art background, here is a way that we can use masterpieces or master artists to inform our projects. And Wassily Kandinsky, the Russian painter, can be considered one of the godfathers of abstraction. And broad strokes, he did color studies of these circular forms, and the colors that were next to each other or in proximity would communicate a different effect. And so those studies informed this felt quilt that I did with folks with advanced dementia. So this is a 3 by 6 foot felt wall hanging, and we pre-cut circles, much like Kandinsky's paintings, and then had allowed people to sort through and stack those colored circles as it appealed to them. And then I tacked the stacked circles onto the felt with just an X stitch. There's some scarf juggling and another use of felt. Again, just to give you some ideas of how you might grow your inspiration and projects. And the last project I'll talk about is for a public arts piece for community wellness. And when I was approached a few years ago by the CEO, he had this objective in mind, in that this 85-year-old hospital, Dakota Hospital, was going to be demolished. And he knew how important it had been to many families and to the community because it had been up so long. And there were doctors and there were people born and people died and people healed. It was really home to some very significant experiences. And he had the foresight to want to create a commemorative work of art. And I served as the project manager for that for the 2 years in the making. We collaborated with the sculpture professor, Chris Myers from University of South Dakota, and Todd Meckling, an instructor with communications and technology. And Todd did the documentation, and Chris created this molding process where we could take really detailed casts of community members. And in total, it was 150. And from that, he made wax molds and arranged them on an armature in this double ellipse, and it was eventually cast in bronze. There's a documentary that is an excerpt from all the footage that was created. And I'd like you to, it's 20 minutes or so, take the time to view that. And in fact, there was a lot of positive response then to this dramatic change of demolishing this old building and building a new hospital. And that, I think, is a wonderful local example of the arts contributing to wellness. So I'm going to pause with that and thank you for listening. I'm happy to share some of these personal stories, and I look forward to seeing what you all are going to be creating in the coming weeks. Thanks again.